Hello family, glad you can join me. Um, we're relating, this video is going to be relating to time travel and sort of continuing our discussions that we've been having. And one of my main emphasis or objectives here is to give us a realistic understanding and the most accurate understanding of what's involved when we're talking about time travel. And another main objective or driving point behind that is the understanding that we're subjected and experience a lot of sci-fi and fantastical ideas about time travel, and that doesn't mean that I'm judging that or thinking that you know what I mean. There is a place for that and stuff, and it gets our juices flowing, and it's also just fantasy and fiction and things like that, sci-fi, enjoying that. And in that sense, we understand that there could be just little sprinkles of a realistic or accurate science, and then and the rest is colorful story and stuff. But I want to also add on to that, okay, my belief and experience that there are agendas and there are some negative effects to sci-fi ideas. It can be used for bad, in the sense that and in a very actual sense that happens is it fills us with a lot of misinfo, and to make a long story short of where I'm going with that, in a way, it dumbs us down, and it sends us off on the wrong trails and the long paths and stuff. So believe it or not, what we may get inspired on some of these ideas, but at the same time, there's an equal, or there's a pretty notable dead end, a negative effect to these fantastical ideas as well and stuff. So we're never really on the right track, so to speak, and then the more we keep going, the more it spirals out of control. So yeah, we sound amazing when we're talking about fantastical ideas, or when we're talking about these sci-fi ideas, and they're amazing, and oftentimes everyone's going to nudge you and say, the justification is, oh yeah, it could be, and it certainly can, okay, but that's fine, that's all covered then, right? We're here to actually learn some practical and realistic. It's not my judgment call. We're here to learn some of the actual science that's behind time travel and stuff. So where I'm going to start us off in this set is I want to talk about this idea of understanding that we sometime not too long ago, relatively speaking, but not too long ago, we started understanding that the universe and the way the physical relationships are, in with their temporal natures as well, okay, isn't a free for all, and right? It's not just one thing. Obviously, we've certainly spent our time considering free-for-alls, non-linear, anything goes and stuff like that. But for example, I'll just give you a little fun to keep you occupied while you listen to me get to the point of what the point is going to be. A lot of our ideas of time travel aren't actually true time travels. What they are traveling to another dimension, another world, another version of us. But that's not time travel necessarily. And that's not an accurate time travel, or definitely not a traditional time travel. And it's not time travel based on a large bulk of what we do have that we can really work off of. It's time travel based off of those smaller and much more unknown areas that we're still debating and trying to figure out, areas where if you subscribe to a certain set of differential equations and stuff, then you get these possibilities, and within that zone, within that pathway, you can then come up with this and stuff. But when you curl back, there's no telling that if that pathway is even, you know what I mean? And then we're using certain formulas and stuff for one thing, and then we're applying it, and we're seeing how it goes for another thing, and you try it, and that's science, you know what I mean? Yeah, sure. So a lot of our time travel and stuff is not actually a classic time travel. Okay, in fact, it may actually have nothing to do with time, so to speak, or very little to do with an accurate definition of time, or at least the one that we have a decent amount of access to, and where we can work our formulas and stuff. You're talking about saying, well, the only way that we can jump back to previous light that would matter, that would mean anything, okay, is to get us in like a parallel, right, or another version of our reality now and in the past or whatever, but another point. But in order for it to be accurate, in order for it to make any sense and do all of the sci-fi stuff that we want, we need that jump. We have problems staying in that one line, because if we stay into that one line, here's what we're dealing with, and here's what's happening. What's happening is we're dealing with things called a preservation, and then we understand that there's a certain violations of the order and structure of matter, and right, and so boy, I'm going to be making sure that I work hard to try to choose some common, ordinary terms, not in any disrespectful way, but one I believe that these things can be discussed in all kinds of terms, especially ones that we're familiar with, and we don't need, very unique words at the same time. Okay, so what we have is okay, we're talking about violations in time, right, and violations of the order of matter and stuff, and the classic way that we talk about this, and the classic way to represent this, is through paradox. And one of the classic paradoxes that we talked about was, and I totally have faith that I can do all of this without a whiteboard or without any props other than my hands. I've had this conversation heaps of times and stuff like that, so the only reason I may look like, one of the reasons I may look like I'm searching or whatever, is I'm trying to find a way to we're free going, but also finding a way to try to, edit as we go and get as much, pertinent and as much relevant info without needing, 3 or 4 parts and stuff. Oftentimes we wind up needing 3 and 4 parts. It's not any insult to our approach and discussion here. Obviously these topics can be quite and or expansive. So okay, so and just to be a little bit cool about it and not be so brutal, there's some people that are superstitious, and when you're demonstrating something or you're talking about something, never demonstrate on yourself, or never also suggest or imply that it's you as the subject of your example or somebody else but I think that that's cool etiquette as well and stuff like that. So in that sense, in our example of the classic paradox of time travel, we're not going to say, okay, we're going back and killing somebody's blah 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 or whatever and stuff like that. What the hell? What is there even a need, right? But okay, so you start at some point in the present that we define or represent as the present, okay, and from there you go back in time to some point where there's something that if you obstruct this something, that something will be, okay, that will affect you being born, and you will not be born. And then the paradox goes, well, if you weren't born, then as time progresses again and reaches that moment that was the present, okay, you wouldn't be alive, you wouldn't be there. Or to make a long story short, if you do something that changes the fact that you were alive and it makes it so that you were never born, then you can't be alive, then you are not alive to actually go back in time, right? And prevent yourself from being born. And hence we have the paradox. And if you didn't prevent yourself from being born, okay, that means you were born. If you were born, that means there comes that moment when you do go back in time to not make yourself born. And if you were not born, you can't ever be alive to go back in time to make yourself not born, to screw that up, so which means you are alive, and we keep going, and hence the paradox. And let me explain to you how this is not a paradox. And one, for starters, most paradoxes are not paradoxes. They don't really exist. The paradox occurs because there's a breakdown in the representation, there's a breakdown in our symbolism and that we use, and multiple breakdowns across the board between how we're representing it, and we're probably missing something. I'm not the only one to express that idea. A lot of great thinkers in a lot of forms and also directly express that same idea. Okay, they're not really paradoxes. When we come across paradoxes, they're not really paradoxes. They they're not an actual problem in existence. They're a problem with our experience or perception, and more times than not, ultimately our representation. We're missing something, or we're not doing something right, or we're interpreting something wrong or inaccurately, not entirely right, and hence we get the paradox. Okay, so let's explain why the paradox is, why we're getting a paradox here. Let's explain why the paradox is it's not a paradox. Let's explain why there's not a problem. There, boom. It was almost a paradox, and now sentences. Okay, let's explain why there's not a problem. Because, all right, because we understand that we see, okay, and I've been using this and I've been liking this term, and maybe years ago, maybe I've used a couple other terms I was a little bit more into at that time and stuff. So you hear me using this term called origin source. And I have some lovely friends when we have this discussion, and one particular friend most recently, okay, salute to her, awesome friend, and all my friends and fam here in the community and stuff like that are awesome. So she says, if she doesn't mind, and so she says, when I hear you use the term origin source, I think of God, and that's actually absolutely true. That doesn't mean it's exclusive. It means what the nature of God, when we're talking about God, or we want to represent God and we want to work on some formulas or a philosophy, or you know what I mean, or understanding, right, or terminology. An effective terminology to use is origin source. Yes, God would be an origin source. God would represent an origin source. And it's not any fantastical secret or law or stretch of the imagination to use that terminology for that, since we've often also attached and understand what comes along with God is as a creator. So, right? So whether we're talking about a beginning of time or beginning of the universe or beginning, those are all states, those are all moments or whatever that are in a creative, that involve a bunch of terms and variables and values in the mode of or dimension of creator. Okay, or rules and laws are being defined, a reality or a state of being is being defined and stuff. So yeah, but not exclusive to God. It's exclusive to exactly what you think it means and says when it says an origin state. So an origin source. Okay, so what we're talking about is some kind of condition, but I've said this before, the condition doesn't necessarily mean that it's the beginning of time or it's the beginning of anything, okay? Because we certainly can be talking about it in a relative sense, and we have. And Einstein's work and stuff like that certainly has. We understand the nature of relativity, but we also express and we study that relativity through the subjects or main ideas of the observer. Okay, and then we can also prioritize or define that relationship, so to speak. So the background, and the observer, or two observers, and observe one of, and the characteristics of them and their environment, like observers in motion and stuff like that. So yeah. So in that sense, what we're doing is we're making the stability in some of our values and formulas that we build and represent in those examples will occur from the observers. So in that sense, the observers are origin sources. Okay, but in order to determine and measure accurate values of the origin sources, we needed to, or we eventually moved to an understanding of relativity in order to do so. Relativity never meant, or didn't entirely or exclusively mean, that there's no truth, and that there's no truth to the subjects, the observers. All it says is this is the method in order to identify and measure that truth and to understand that truth and stuff. And yeah, so in that sense there was a variation in the truth and stuff like that. But we also understood that there were all parts of it that are not variant, that there are also constants in that as well. And when those constants are violated, they're often not entirely broken, and because when they're entirely broken, we understand the theory is just inaccurate or wrong, and then so we'll throw it out or modify it. What happens is just a condition. There are stipulations or different conditions where we find out, and what would be an example of that would be like when we're finding out that you can go faster than the speed of light, but you can't go faster than the speed of light within the rules that we understood, the max that is of speed of light in a particular condition or whatever. It takes a different kind of condition, or in order to say, well, light is faster here. But no matter what condition we have, okay, we understand that there still can be truths for that light. Whatever condition, wherever light is going faster than the speed of light that we thought, that we first measured, wherever that is, there's a new max for that. And if there's an unlimited nature to the max, well, then that is the rule or whatever, and the constant. Okay, so let me reset the video. All right, folks, so, look, a word that I like using a lot more recently is symmetry. And when we talk about symmetry, and an accurate understanding of symmetry is to apply that, or to understand that that's applying to the relationships. And symmetry doesn't necessarily means there have to be a perfect, maybe or whatever, but it may, depending on what you're talking about, that's a little bit more complex. But symmetry could also mean a lot more in terms of stabilization. And so what we think about is not violating an order to our laws, or an order to matter, like I said earlier and stuff. So of course we figured this type of law or order or structured order could also be the case for temporal natures as well. So we figure that there's a symmetry for time, and then we understood, and based on the fact of studying and further analyzing paradoxes and things like that, and we understand that, well, the reason a lot of these paradoxes don't happen and stuff, and why the universe doesn't, screw itself over and just, fall apart and stuff, is because it does follow a logical order and to itself. And I've studied that extensively. I think that logical order is actually absolute and locked in, and I've studied it to the point where I've identified it or isolated it to the only way that it can lock itself in, and the only way that it can have a logical order for such a mass scale and for such everything that we're dealing with, is if there are no other possibilities, there are no other choices of a particular order or way that it could happen. So there is one and only one way, logic set on that scale, in the magnitude of fundamental or ultimate or absolute scale of an existence, or the possibility to exist. And so what we're talking about is like a time symmetry, and we're talking about understanding what the logic is involved in, how nature or whatever, the existence or whatnot, the laws, how they uphold that, so that there aren't violations and breakdowns in that. And what we did was I gave you a brief example of a breakdown of that in the paradox. And now let's discuss about somebody who travels back in time to change the fact that they were born so that they were never alive, to go back in time and change the fact that they were born so they are actually alive, to go back, and it's a paradox and it doesn't work. Okay, and why do we have this type of breakdown in the consideration sets where we're thinking that there's some kind of problem on our side? It's way more noble. It's way more what's the word that I'm looking for and stuff like that. It's way more respectful to probably assume, or at least start on the springboard of how we're to approach this, by assuming that we're probably wrong and screwing something up, rather than assuming that, hey, nature's messed up, the universe is messed up, it's got it all wrong, don't know what the hell it's doing. Probably not. It's probably on our side. You know what I'm saying? Let's be cool about that, right? So the cool thing is we're going to fix some of that right now. And all right, so. And I've studied this all my life, the logic set. This is my forte. It doesn't mean that I'm a master logician or something like that. I don't care about those things and stuff. And it's almost impossible at this point. And if that's somebody's thing, to be the textbook thing, then they might not have spent as much time doing it in application. We have to share. We have to all piece together. It's the same thing as a computer. It's the same thing. Okay, we got to do the same thing. It's going to be no different. Okay, we got to piece all of our chats and all of our brain powers and discussions and analyzing. We got to piece it together and stuff. I can't do it all on my own. It's impossible. It's too much. I can't. How much time it takes just to learn what symbol set somebody's going to use for a particular physics. Okay, yeah, once I can identify, I'm meandering, aren't I, snowballing? Once I can identify that as saying, oh, okay, so we're solving for unknown, or, you know, this is a trigonometry issue, or this is a geometry type of thing, okay, fine. And once I can see multiplication is involved. But it's a hell of a problem understanding it's almost like everyone is like a club or a group. You know, everything has its particular set of terms and stuff, and you have to actually learn, okay, what those terms are, and then learn when you can apply those terms also. But that's the next thing as well. Man, what's happening? What's happening? So right. So let's see if I can, you know, flex my muscle here and bring this to you in all its glory and lovely simplification and stuff like that. Let's start with the truth. Let's start with what actually is, what actually happened. Not philosophical. Don't help me, Snowball. It ain't about any technicalities or nothing. Let's start with the truth. Let's start with what actually is for a fact. Okay, because otherwise everything is gibberish. No, we can't move forward from there, pack it up, and just accept that everything is illogical, irrational. That's not the case. Nobody's going to stand for that. Right? So, here is a person who's going to go back in time. This is the truth. The truth is there is a matter, okay, a mass here, a person. That's the truth, okay? And that person is going to go back in time and do something, okay, to prevent himself from being born, right? When that person goes back in time, nothing changes the fact. This is nothing's going to change the fact that that happened, that was true, that there was a person who went back in time. That's the truth, right? Everything else is just inaccurate semantics, and screwing ourselves over and stuff. I don't want to hear it. Okay, I want us to understand we need to put our foot down, otherwise we're shooting ourselves in the foot. Okay, that's accurate logic. Okay, there is or slash was, say he's not there, he's over here, whatever. But there was, is, and was a person here at that time who existed, okay, who went back in time. Once that happens, that there's a person, it's stamped in a time symmetry. It's stamped, it's etched eternally, regardless if anyone ever actually notices that person or not. If a tree falls in the forest and you're not there, it's just it's a fantastic thought exercise and stuff like that, but don't let it be used in a manipulative way, okay, to screw you over from having an accurate logic and reasoning, okay? It's not rocket science. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, a tree fell in the forest, okay? Are you asking me to tell you what truths there are? Or are you going to actually be logical and reasonable and come with me with the example and say, okay, let's start the thought experiment. Here's what happened. What happened? Here's what happened. A tree fell. Well, okay. Well, it doesn't really matter if I heard it or not then, does it? Because what is the truth? The truth is the tree fell. Yeah, but no. Well, why are you doing this? Why are you biased? Why are you trying to find ways to convince me that there's no such thing as truth? Which we can expand into, why are you trying to find ways to convince me that there are no such thing as things happening? That there are no such thing as things being able to experience something? Even if it's entirely an illusion or construct of the system that's doing the experiencing. No matter what you do and give me, okay, there's always going to be something. There's always going to be some origin source. I don't care if this is all fake. Okay, it's still, something has to exist in order for something to be fake. Because the only way you can tell me, or the only way we can ever get to a true zero is by saying nothing. But it's impossible. Because the only things that can tell you that there is no such thing as anything are things. The only thing that can tell you that there is that everything is an illusion is something that's, you know, something that can tell you that there's not illusion. So to some degree or some point, you know, it isn't illusion and stuff. And where am I ultimately getting at? Only things that exist can consider and think about non-existence. Understand that concept? It's a brilliant concept and stuff like that. you certainly can get to a lot of technicalities, but you can say, well, I can make a program, and I can have a computer graphic say that it doesn't exist and do this stuff. And the computer graphic is doing what you did, the data and the program. So the program, so you're telling me that the program exists because only things that exist can say that they can't exist? Well, yeah. Man, don't be a jerk to me. Don't be a jerk. Are you trying to tell me that? Are you wanting me to imply that based on that criteria, the thing is also sentient? I don't care to talk about sentient. You don't need sentient. You don't need an advanced consciousness to define something as existing. We understand that in terms of matter. We understand that in our sort of way that we say, oh, this is rock. These are rocks, and whether you think that rocks are thinking or not, that's cool, or whatever. But the point is, right? So just because something, whatever. So okay. Did I not say that we're going to do this in all our simplistic glory? It is fun, simplistic glory, and there's nothing wrong with beautiful simplicity in logic and stuff like that. But so because another way to think about it, because the paradox, it works both ways, man. You want to have this guy be completely true and do all these things, okay, when everything is great. Then we want him to go over here and then kickstart the problem. No. The problem starts right there then, because the problem starts with applying accurate logic and reasoning to it, or inaccurate logic. The problem doesn't start when he makes the first move here and kickstarts the paradox. No, the problem starts right here. When you insisted that this person could actually, be in violation. When you insisted that this person can do something so as to change the truth that's etched in eternity. Once something exists, once there's an interaction, once, you know what I'm saying? Once it is, whatever, okay, it's stamped. It's an absolute. It's unchangeable. The fact that it once was, it totally could be obliterated, it's changed in structure and state, and things certainly do. But that doesn't change the truth at any of those other particular times. You may create new truths or modify or change truth. You may change the new truth, a new truth, or for a new moment or whatever. But you can never change, the past truth. Once it's done, it's done. It's a beautiful logic that existence uses to lock in absolute truth, so that it can lock in a functionable, logic and reasoning, so that it can lock in a functionable law and order to itself. If this weren't true, even if I didn't give you all of this, if this weren't true, there wouldn't be any of this. It would all collapse, and it wouldn't. Right? It wouldn't be any of this in the first place. Don't tell me, well, we could be in the process of a collapse. Maybe this is a collapse, and it seems long to us, but it'll be in the blink of an eye. No, it would never be anything to even structuralize and form, in order to then collapse in a blink of an eye. It would never start from the beginning. There would be no beginning. There would be no start of anything. It would be nothing. And since there is something, regardless of illusion or whatever, you can't have an illusion if you don't have some kind of truth. You can't have a lie if you don't have some kind of truth. You can't have anything if we don't have some kind of truth. You can't tell me that that's not a car, it's a boat, if we don't actually have any matter at all. So I know that there's something, and that's cool. Getting it wrong, misinterpreting it, is still a start, right? So anyway, we know for a fact that this person existed. And he went back in time, and he did something to stop himself from existing. His birth never happened and stuff. Now that I told you that his birth never happened, right? So so right now, in this point right here, in what he had just done, it means or has a value of him now. It caused, it's going to change that next moment where he was born, so that he wasn't born. Go back to the truth of this past over here. And you're saying, well, was there ever a guy that went back in time to change it? Or you're saying now the paradox wants to say no, there wasn't, but that's not true. That's inaccurate logic. That's why the paradox happens. It's inaccurate logic and reasoning. You're wrong, you're mistaken. He was. He was there. Like I said, the paradox starts here, not there. The paradox starts here when you're telling me that there's a possibility that this guy who totally exists, because that's the only way he can go back and screw things up, you're telling me that it's also equally possible that simultaneously that he can't. And that's not true. That's a violation of time symmetry. That's a violation of logic and reasoning. That makes no sense. Or if you want to say he's going to go back in time and he's going to do something and he will cease to make himself exist from every point after that, we're running into a lot of problems over there and a lot of inconsistencies. And we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so a big problem we do is we make the mistake of thinking that symmetry is selective and stuff. We don't often look at the bigger picture, like the way we refer to time travel in terms of light for an individual, but we didn't realize that it's also light for an entire system as well. And this is some of the reasons why we do think that, well, if the light is for an entire universe or whatever, then, shouldn't that act like a whole nother world? Well, it didn't act like a whole nother world for the individual, 3D 4/4D amount of light of the person. So why would the entire universe's amount of light be any different and stuff? So it's the same thing here. Okay, the violation we're trying to cherry pick here is we're saying, okay, so there is a preservation of the relationships. If the only way he could ever go back in time and do anything, this person, is if it's stamped in the truth of existence that he exists. Okay? If he doesn't exist, he can never go back to start this problem to begin with. He must exist. So one way to think about it is, in order to have the paradox at all, he must exist, which means that there's a second paradox on top of the first paradox. The second paradox is the logical paradox. It's a paradox only because there's a first paradox, which is a problem. Right? The second paradox cancels out the first paradox. The second paradox is saying, you can't screw him up with a paradox unless he exists. So the only way that you can cause him problems is by him not having a problem. And that makes a lot of sense if you think about it, even in jargon, because that's a good definition of a problem. One of the classic definitions of a problem, one version of a problem in psychology, whatever, is when somebody believes they have a problem, but they don't have a problem. There's no problem, and oftentimes that's a really complicated problem, because how do you solve a problem that's not actually there? Especially if you're looking, holy moly, we're going out of control, right? Especially if you're looking for a problem that's not there. It's not broken, but we're insisting on fixing something that's not broken, right? So we might spend a lifetime just trying to look for what to fix. You see how that's a problem? Okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about the preservation of that symmetry of the relationship, okay? So when he goes back in time, nothing changes the fact that he was alive. But what we want to do is we want to then say, well, we want to jump and hop skip that, right? And say, well, whatever he did is going to affect the next preceding moments. Yeah, but the truth is here too. So you're giving me two sets of moments now. You're giving me the paradox one, let's say, which is right here. You're saying, oh, well, he doesn't exist anymore, okay? And then there's the truth, which is this moment, but he does exist. He must exist, because in order to even have this, he must exist. So if you're telling me that he did something wrong, okay, and he's not here, then he can never be there to cause that, which means he's back, which means this is back, which means this is not, but then if that's not, you see? But what we're doing is we're trying to do it in a sci-fi way. You're thinking it's a paradox, but it's not a paradox, okay? The violation and the recorrection happen all simultaneously. It happens, it doesn't even happen it's almost misleading to say that, okay? In the sense that it's simultaneously within that supersymmetry, right? Right. So that and in that sense, yeah. So there's never a violation. It only looks vivid because we need to kind of see it. So we sort of stretch it, but this is all just happening instantaneously. There is no real time for that. This is the check within the system that is absolute. That's on a fundamental absolute scale. He can't exist unless this is not true. Unless this, so every time you think you're going to do this, and this is going to cause this, the check, okay, the symmetry check, whatever, says no. And that stops. That's what happens, because if that didn't happen, okay, then this magical line, which we believe exists so that things we do in the past can affect the future, that magical line would be a highway would that still be open. Who's to say that it only needs a very dominant physical time travel? In that sense, you know how the ideas are, people saying everything we're doing now is affecting the future. So if somebody was in the future, it would kind of be like this mishmash, constantly changing. 1 minute you were president, the next minute you became poor, but then, you know, maybe something you did the next day changed that. You see how, well, that would be a two-way street. So that would constantly be happening in the past as well. So even from a present tense, if we were to believe that there was that magical connection so that you can go in the past and still affect things now, in the present, if there was that ability, okay, then there should be some effects that happen that could affect it even from the present tense. You don't need to actually do a massive or significant travel to the past to actually affect the present. There would be no structure or a lot of instability here and stuff, but that's not what happens. Okay? And a complicated one is that if it does happen, it happens within a very ordered structure that probably still obeys a rule. So that we would explain, well, that's maybe just how change is. That's how we get change. But that's the same as still just saying, okay, well, there's a certain code that protects from violations and stuff like that, right? So no, but even further with the logic and reasoning of that, okay, you're getting these 2 points. No matter what comes back as a result of him going back, okay, it's never going to change the fact that he existed to go back. So what you're trying to do now is you're trying to further create illogic by saying this one line that comes back now is going to replace this one. But it can't. Because number 2 you're suggesting, or number 3 or number 7, we're also suggesting, I don't mean to say you, I'm going to use you as the bad reasoning person and something, and ultimately it's not bad when we're exploring and stuff. But also, okay, we create, it's 2 timelines that you want to then also magically jump when they meet. No, it's not 2 timelines, he's coming back. Because that's how the paradox works anyway. That's what we need. That's the order we need in order to have our paradox. He's got to come back on that same line in order to screw up that line. His result, the effects of what he's done, needs to come back on that line. If you're telling me it's on this one, then why doesn't it just keep going? It's as good as not. It's fantastical. It's sci-fi. It's inaccurate. It's not possible, it doesn't exist, it makes no sense. Even if you force the sense, it's as good as not existing. The precedence, the presence, the origin source is always right here, because it is the origin source, because it is the truth. And no matter how many times he goes back to the past, he'll never know what he's changing, because that's always these imaginary ones that sci-fi wants to keep telling you are places. If only he could jump to them. He can't jump to them because there's nothing to jump to, because all of these imaginary would-be conditions are part of the equation of the truth of him. They are all possibilities or all events or whatever that could have happened, but that didn't happen, or that can't happen. They always just make up the full equation of him. They're not somewhere else, okay? And hence we get these ideas. In order to make sci-fi work, we're not really talking about an accurate relationships of time and matter. What we're talking about is we're just throwing in a very convenient premise that there's many worlds and many versions just as real and just as in effect as the one you think is the source and stuff. And you know what? That's has a lot of inaccuracy to that. And right. And even like I said before, even if I was to entertain that was true, in order for that to be true, it would still need an origin source. It would still need, okay, the code, the actual, okay? It would still need the actual DNA. You can't have a mutation. If you don't have any DNA, what's the mutation? You know what I'm saying? what's the mutation coming from? Well, mutation of what? Like if you don't have the matter, how are you telling me, oh, well, there's a multiple, another version? If you say, how can there be a recurrence of A if there is no A? There's got to be A. Whatever A is, there's got to be an A if you're telling me there's 20 A's. There is no paradox. You cannot, once something happens, once something exists, it doesn't need anything else to prove or define its existence except the interaction of itself. That's the first absolute condition for an existence, for a thing to exist, okay? And naturally, that does mean that there is a second thing, okay? But what I'd like to get out from the sci-fi sense is that idea that second thing needs to be another observer and stuff. No, okay? The preservation of the symmetry occurs in the truth of the existence. If it is a thing that does exist, if it is a thing that interacts, okay, then its first interaction is the interaction with itself, meaning that it stabilizes a relationship of whatever it needs and whatever it means for it to exist and stuff. And it's obviously can be way more complicated than that, but that's a great way I've worked at being able to give you such a basic terminology for what's happening, for whatever, okay? So whatever exists, it can be represented as whatever possibility makes it possible for it to exist, and then whatever is possible because it exists. If you take those two sides or whatever, you usually get a full equation of the thing that exists, right? Because it's not just all the things that it needed in order to make it possible, it then has an effect, right? It then has results and it is the cause of a bunch of stuff as well. So if you wanted to know a comprehensive value and identity of that which exists, you would also need to look at all of those relationships, all of that are affected and interacting with it or as a result of it as well. And hence, we get this cyclic nature, certainly where you can see repeating singularities, where we do reach a boom, and it happens on all types of scales and stuff like that. So yeah, sure. So yeah, my friends, I put my foot down a long time ago, and this doesn't, what it does is, at least we're more accurate, at least when we're exploring possibilities, okay, we don't have to be chasing ourselves in circles in the wrong area. We can use that time more effectively and stuff. So yes, okay, if we're thinking about time traveling within our, physical space that we have in our reality and whatever, I don't think, no, there will not be a situation where you can go to the past and change it and all of a sudden you'll be a millionaire in the present and everything changes in the present. No, okay? What that leaves us with is the idea that, all of that truth, that stamp that happens, okay, we understand some funny things about time, and we understand that time does have a physical property to it, and vice versa. And physical properties have temporal property as well, and they're interchangeable. Okay, you can translate. They're equivalent. There are equivalents and stuff. And so when we are talking about positions and locations and stuff, we do. And this is where we get into the other side. We do look at locations where perhaps there are that stamping of the truth, okay, can be affected and whatnot. But even in those cases, I'm telling you so far, in many years of analyzing, I'm telling you, they behave way more like another world than they do your actual timeline. So it's like a technicality. So you see what I'm saying? The technicality is you've jumped over and done something. Okay, because the truth is, because here's how it works. Okay, let's say there should be an infinite amount of actualizations of the possibilities of you. Okay, so the real accurate way to say it is you're not changing anything, really, in a way, or you don't have to. Okay, if you could actually find the line where you're the millionaire or billionaire, fine, but that could be quite difficult. So what we often look at is you're going to not only need to jump to a different world of you, okay, you're then going to try to do something in that world to change. Am I right? So do you see that maybe there's going to be that symmetry violation problem no matter where you go and stuff. So now, okay, I've just brought you, and I've just crashed the party even worse, okay? You will never go back to a previous moment and change it so that you become rich and think and stuff. That will never happen no matter how many worlds you jump to. You actually need to just jump to the world where you were rich because of whatever reasons you did. But you can't jump to another world where you're not rich and do something in the past to change that, because you're still faced with the same law and order that you are faced with here. Nothing changes. So all those wonderful people who theorizing that, each moment is an entire slice of the universe that can be treated as an individual, independent universe, okay? Which makes absolutely no sense, because each universe would die if it had no true connection to the source, because what would continue to feed it its data, its value? What would continue to feed it its truth? Well, now you're saying, well, I gotta, that's a good point, crawlFace. Wow, I gotta really compensate for that. Okay, every time the universe slices in that moment, it becomes the source, and then slices in the source, and then slice. What is this gibberish nonsense? So there's just an infinite amount of an infinite amount of an infinite amount. It's just, listen, I don't think nature even has an interest in being that way. It doesn't. It seems more like possibilities and descriptions that we can get to through math, through the formula and the reasoning stuff. It does, because it's another great one. Because we actually saw it in the math, and the math proves that it could happen. And I'm not talking about in time, anything in time, but just generally speaking, doesn't always mean that it's actually happening. Okay, because sometimes we explore things. It doesn't mean it's happening. It doesn't. I mean, that's a debatable thing. One time I did think, if it's possible, then somewhere, somehow, it happens. Interesting. Maybe not, though. Maybe not. I mean, sounds good at first. I mean, if it's possible, so that means all possibilities are always actualized. Maybe, but my point is, even if you thought you were going to escape, okay, the symmetry of time, if you thought you were going to escape that by jumping to another world, you were wrong. You would still need to just jump to the version. How do you do that? How do you find the one that you want? There are reasoning and stuff. None of this stuff is what I'm making up. I'm just sharing my experiences and conversations over the years and studying and reviewing this stuff. I don't nearly as much anymore and stuff, but it's still there. And I could even point you to old videos from 8-9 years ago. Every once in a while, for fun, I try to scroll back 8-9 years to see that. And it's very difficult to. I don't know if YouTube found a way to search it. I thought it did, but I still found a hard time to find comments I made 9 years ago, back when I frequented a lot more of the physics videos and stuff like that. Had a great time. Cool thing is I actually saved a lot of those comments. I always copied and pasted them and saved them and stuff. But so if you thought that you were just going to have many worlds and that was going to take care of the problem, no. So what are some of the potential possibilities we were thinking about? Well, thinking in terms spatially, okay, could there be a 4D position that allows us to look across multiple amount or an entire amount of 3D? You bet your life there could. You bet your life you could. Wouldn't you love to drive on that 4D highway? Right now we are driving on that 4D highway. Space-time, and the ability, how functional space-time is in that represents, it was one way to prove it, but just logically you could figure it out as well. We are traveling on a 4D highway, one moment at a time, one 3D moment at a time. But we travel, we occur multiply, okay? We reoccur because we actually have 4D property. We have a 4D relationship involved, which we've described as time. So you understand how time is not necessarily an illusion. It's just a term. It's an amazing term we use to represent some actual physical properties. and also, no, yeah, but physical properties, because you describe matter and you could describe energy as physical. So yeah. So if we can get a better position in 4D, if we can get a better access to 4D, we can see across multiple amounts of the 3D time. Okay, we could see across, and perhaps, okay, you could choose the one with always be potential. Because if you're telling me that the future is set, then you're talking determinism, and that's another 10-part video series, dude. Okay? But you could definitely jump to the line that had potential. And if you had a great formula or you were really great at working potential, you could say, oh, look, that timeline is 98% potential that in a year from the point that I have access to, I'll be a millionaire.